My name is Isabella Chen, and for 3 years, I poured my heart and soul into something that would change everything, only to watch others take credit for it. This is the story of how I went from being completely invisible to having a federal judge declare that I was the reason an entire multi-million-dollar project existed. What I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a story that plays out in corporate boardrooms and research labs across America every day. It's about brilliant minds whose innovations get stolen, about young professionals whose breakthroughs get credited to their bosses, and about a system that values who you know over what you create. But it's also about what happens when someone decides to fight back, no matter the cost. I need you to understand something from the beginning. I never wanted to be a whistleblower. I never wanted to be the person who sued her former employer or testified before federal investigators. I wanted to be an engineer, to solve problems, to make the world a little bit better through technology and innovation. But sometimes, the world doesn't give you that choice. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, I watched my immigrant parents work 2 jobs each just to keep our family afloat. My father, Wei Chen, had been a civil engineer in Taiwan, but his credentials weren't recognized in the United States, so he drove for a taxi company during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. My mother, Lynn, had been a high school math teacher, but language barriers and certification requirements meant she could only find work as a house cleaner and part-time tutor. Every winter when the rains came, our neighborhood would flood. I would watch from our second-floor apartment window as water rose in the streets, seeping into ground-floor businesses and apartments where families like ours lived because they couldn't afford anything better. The city's drainage system was decades old, designed for a different climate and a smaller population. When the storms hit, it was always the same communities that suffered: the poor, the immigrant families, the people who had no political power to demand better infrastructure. "Isabella," my father would say in his careful English, pointing out at the flooded streets. "You see this problem? You study hard, you become engineer, you fix this problem." He said it with such conviction, such faith that education could overcome any obstacle, that I believed him completely. That belief carried me through years of being the only Asian girl in my advanced math classes, through the subtle discrimination I faced when guidance counselors suggested I consider more practical career paths, through the financial stress of applying to colleges that cost more per year than my parents made combined. When MIT accepted me with a full scholarship, my father cried, the only time I ever saw him show such emotion. At MIT, I threw myself into environmental engineering with the intensity of someone who understood that this opportunity might not come again. I studied flood management systems, urban hydrology, and climate adaptation strategies. But more than that, I started to see how technology could be used not just to solve problems, but to predict and prevent them. During my senior year, I wrote my thesis on predictive modeling for urban flood prevention in low-income communities. The paper explored how artificial intelligence and sensor networks could be used to anticipate flooding events and automatically adjust drainage systems to protect vulnerable neighborhoods. It was theoretical work, the kind of advanced algorithm development that most people assumed was impossible with current technology. But I knew it wasn't impossible. I had spent 4 years studying the mathematics, the engineering principles, and the computer science necessary to make it work. What I needed was the opportunity to turn theory into reality. That opportunity came in September 2021, when I was just 24 years old, fresh out of MIT, with my degree in environmental engineering and a head full of ideas that I was desperate to implement. I had landed what I thought was my dream job at Green Tech Solutions, a rising startup in Austin, Texas, that promised to revolutionize sustainable urban development. The company was small then, maybe 30 employees, but the energy was electric. Everyone believed we were going to change the world. The office was in a converted warehouse in East Austin, all exposed brick and polished concrete floors, with whiteboards covered in equations and architectural sketches. There were ping-pong tables and a coffee bar with beans from local roasters, and motivational posters about innovation and disruption. It felt like the kind of place where a young engineer could make a real difference. Austin itself felt like the perfect city for this kind of work. The population was booming, straining aging infrastructure. Climate change was bringing more intense storms and longer droughts. The city was investing heavily in sustainability initiatives, and there was a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship that seemed to welcome new ideas. When I drove across the Colorado River on my way to work each morning, looking out at the skyline rising from the hill country, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The company culture at Green Tech seemed to embrace collaboration and creativity. During my interview process, CEO David Park had talked about building a diverse team of brilliant minds who could tackle the biggest environmental challenges of our time. "We're not just another tech company," he had said, leaning forward across his glass desk with the kind of enthusiasm that seemed genuine. "We're trying to save communities, to prevent disasters before they happen, to use technology to protect the people who need it most." Those words resonated with me deeply. This wasn't just about building a successful business. It was about using engineering to address the exact problems I had grown up witnessing in my own neighborhood. David Park seemed like the kind of leader I wanted to work for. He was 38 years old, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from having built and sold successful companies. He had founded Green Tech after selling his previous startup, a software company that developed logistics solutions for e-commerce for $200 million. But he talked about Green Tech differently, not as another money-making venture, but as his opportunity to create a meaningful legacy. "I've made enough money to last several lifetimes," he told me during my final interview. "Now I want to use that financial freedom to tackle problems that actually matter. Climate change, infrastructure failure, environmental justice. These are the challenges that will define our generation." What I didn't understand then was how easily people can confuse having good intentions with actually doing good work. How smoothly someone can transition from wanting to solve problems to simply wanting credit for solving them. The warning signs were subtle at first. During company all-hands meetings, David would talk about our innovations and our breakthroughs without mentioning specific contributors. When journalists called for interviews about the company's technology, David and the other executives would handle all media interactions. When potential investors visited, the technical presentations were given by senior staff, while junior employees like me were introduced only briefly, if at all. At the time, I rationalized these patterns as standard corporate behavior. Of course, the CEO would be the public face of the company. Of course, media interviews would be handled by people with more experience. Of course, investors would want to hear from senior leadership rather than individual contributors. But there was something else happening that I was slower to recognize. A systematic devaluation of actual technical work in favor of management and presentation skills. The people who got promoted weren't necessarily the ones who developed the best solutions or created the most innovative approaches. They were the ones who could articulate the work in boardrooms, who could build relationships with investors, who could present themselves as the kind of leaders that funding committees wanted to support. I remember my first day like it was yesterday. The Austin heat was already unbearable at 8 a.m. as I walked into our converted warehouse office space. The building still smelled like sawdust and fresh paint. My supervisor, Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran engineer in his 40s with graying temples and kind eyes, showed me to my workstation, a simple desk in the corner of the open-plan office, right next to the window that looked out onto Lady Bird Lake. Marcus had 15 years of experience in environmental engineering, with previous stints at major consulting firms and municipal government agencies. He had worked on flood control projects in Houston after Hurricane Harvey, on drought mitigation systems in California during the water crisis, and on resilience planning for coastal cities threatened by sea level rise. When he explained the technical challenges we were facing, I could hear the depth of his knowledge and experience. "Isabella, you're going to be working on something that could revolutionize how cities manage water infrastructure," Marcus said, pulling up a chair next to my desk. "We've got this ambitious vision for urban water management systems that can predict and prevent flooding while also purifying rainwater for community use." He showed me preliminary sketches and conceptual frameworks that the team had been developing. The basic idea was sound. Use sensor networks and predictive algorithms to optimize urban drainage systems in real time. But as I studied the existing work, I could see that they were missing the crucial breakthrough that would make the system actually functional. "What's the timeline?" I asked, already mentally cataloging the research I'd need to do. Marcus smiled, but I could see a hint of stress in his expression. "Well, that's the thing. We're competing for a massive federal grant, $50 million from the Department of Environmental Protection. The proposal is due in 18 months. If we get it, this could put green tech on the map permanently. If we don't, he shrugged. Let's just say the company's future depends on this project. The pressure was enormous, but that only motivated me more. This wasn't just an academic exercise or a corporate project. This was a chance to develop technology that could save lives and protect communities. The federal grant program was specifically designed to fund innovations that would benefit underserved communities, exactly the kind of neighborhoods where I had grown up. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself completely in the technical challenges. I would arrive at the office by 6 a.m. when the warehouse was still quiet and I could think without distractions. I stayed until 10 p.m. most nights, long after my colleagues had gone home to their families and social lives. The project became my obsession in the best possible way, the kind of consuming intellectual challenge that makes you forget to eat lunch because you're too excited about the equations you're solving. I started calling it the Community Resilience Network, or CRN, a system that would use AI-powered sensors to monitor weather patterns, soil moisture, and water flow in real time, automatically adjusting drainage systems to prevent flooding while capturing and cleaning rainwater for community use. The name reflected my vision for what this technology could accomplish, not just preventing disasters, but building stronger, more self-sufficient communities. The theoretical framework was complex, involving multiple interconnected systems that had to work together seamlessly. Weather prediction algorithms had to communicate with soil moisture sensors. Drainage control systems had to coordinate with water purification modules. Community notification systems had to provide real-time updates to residents about potential flooding risks and water availability. But the most challenging piece was developing an algorithm sophisticated enough to account for the unique microclimates and drainage patterns within urban environments. Every city block has its own topography, its own soil composition, its own network of storm drains and underground infrastructure. A successful predictive system couldn't rely on broad regional weather forecasts. It had to understand how water would behave in specific neighborhoods, on specific streets, even in specific buildings. "Isabella, right?" Marcus said, adjusting his glasses as he looked at my paperwork. "You're going to be working on something special. We've got this revolutionary idea for urban water management systems. Think of it as smart infrastructure that can predict and prevent flooding while also purifying rainwater for community use." My heart raced. This was exactly why I had gotten into environmental engineering. Growing up in San Francisco, I had watched my neighborhood flood every winter, seen how communities of color and low-income families were always the ones who suffered most when the infrastructure failed. This project could actually make a difference. "What's the timeline?" I asked, already mentally cataloging the research I'd need to do. Marcus smiled. "Well, that's the thing. We're competing for a massive federal grant, $50 million from the Department of Environmental Protection. The proposal is due in 18 months. If we get it, this could put green tech on the map permanently." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the work with an intensity that surprised even me. I would arrive at the office by 6 a.m., often staying until 10 p.m. The project became my obsession. I started calling it the Community Resilience Network, or CRN, a system that would use AI-powered sensors to monitor weather patterns, soil moisture, and water flow in real time, automatically adjusting drainage systems to prevent flooding while capturing and cleaning rainwater for community use. The breakthrough came on a rainy October evening. I was alone in the office, surrounded by empty coffee cups and pages of calculations, when I finally cracked the algorithm that would make the whole system work. The key was creating a predictive model that could account for the unique microclimates within urban environments, something no one had successfully done before. I called Marcus immediately, even though it was nearly midnight. "Isabella, is everything okay?" His voice was groggy with sleep. "Marcus, I figured it out. The predictive algorithm, I know how to make it work. We can actually predict flooding events up to 72 hours in advance with 94% accuracy." There was a long pause. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I've been running simulations all night. This changes everything." The next morning, word spread quickly through the office. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about my work. The CEO, David Park, a smooth-talking former tech executive who had founded the company after selling his previous startup for hundreds of millions, called me into his glass-walled office overlooking the warehouse floor. "Isabella," he said, leaning back in his expensive ergonomic chair, "Marcus tells me you've made a significant breakthrough." I nodded, trying to contain my excitement. The predictive modeling system I've developed could revolutionize how cities manage water infrastructure. We're talking about preventing billions of dollars in flood damage while also addressing water scarcity issues. David's eyes lit up with dollar signs. "How quickly can you get me a full technical report?" "I can have something comprehensive ready by the end of the week." "Perfect. This could be exactly what we need to secure that federal grant." I spent the next 3 days documenting everything: the theoretical framework, the algorithm design, the implementation strategy, even preliminary cost projections. It was a 47-page technical masterpiece that represented months of intensive research and innovation. When I submitted the report, I felt a surge of pride. This was my contribution to something bigger than myself. This was how I was going to help communities like the one I grew up in. But then, something strange started happening. In meetings about the project, my name began disappearing from conversations. When David presented updates to the board of directors, he would talk about the team's breakthrough or our innovative approach, but never specifically mention my work. When investors visited, Marcus would give tours and explain the technology, but I was never introduced as the person who had developed the core algorithm. At first, I told myself it was just corporate politics. Maybe they were trying to present a unified team front. Maybe individual contributions weren't important in the bigger picture. But as weeks turned into months, the erasure became more obvious and more painful. The worst part was watching my colleagues get credit for work I had done. Sarah Kim, a marketing manager who had joined the company just 2 months after me, began referring to herself as the project coordinator in emails and presentations. James Wilson, a software developer who had helped implement my algorithm, started calling himself the lead technical architect. Even Marcus, who I had trusted and respected, began downplaying my contributions in status meetings. "The algorithm development was a team effort," he would say when asked about technical details. "We had several engineers working on different aspects of the predictive modeling." I tried to speak up. In one particularly frustrating meeting in January 2022, when David was explaining our technology to a group of potential partners, I raised my hand. "Actually, I developed the core predictive algorithm that makes the whole system possible," I said, my voice steady, but my heart pounding. The room went quiet. David looked at me with what I can only describe as mild annoyance. "Isabella, we've talked about this. This project is the result of collaborative effort. No single person can take credit for what we've accomplished here." But I knew the truth. I had the original research files, the development logs, the email chains documenting my work. I had timestamps showing that I had been working on the algorithm for months before anyone else even understood what I was trying to do. The breaking point came in March 2022 when I discovered that the company was preparing to submit the federal grant proposal with my work as the centerpiece, but my name appeared nowhere in the application as a primary contributor. Instead, the proposal listed David as the principal investigator, Marcus as the senior technical lead, and Sarah as the project manager. I was mentioned only as a junior research associate. I requested a meeting with David immediately. "This isn't right," I said, sliding a copy of the grant proposal across his desk. "This algorithm is my work. These innovations came from my research. How can you submit this application without acknowledging that?" David barely glanced at the papers. "Isabella, you're a valued member of this team, but you need to understand how these things work. Grant applications require senior-level leadership. Investors and government agencies want to see experienced names attached to major projects. But I'm the one who actually developed the technology. You developed one component of a much larger system. Yes, your algorithm work was important, but it's just one piece of the puzzle." I felt my face flush with anger and frustration. "It's not just one piece. It's the piece that makes everything else possible. Without my algorithm, this project doesn't work." David's expression hardened. "Isabella, I'm going to give you some advice. In this industry, team players get ahead. People who try to claim individual credit for collaborative work don't last long. I suggest you think carefully about what kind of employee you want to be." The threat was clear, even if he didn't say it directly. Play along, or find yourself looking for a new job. That night, I drove home to my small apartment in East Austin, my mind racing. The city lights blurred past my windshield as I tried to process what had happened. I had always believed that hard work and innovation would be rewarded, that good ideas would be recognized regardless of who came up with them. But apparently, in the real world, being right wasn't enough. Being talented wasn't enough. Having the best ideas wasn't enough. I pulled into my parking spot and sat in my car for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of live music drifting from the bars on 6th Street. Austin was supposed to be a city where creativity and innovation thrived, where outsiders could make their mark. But I was beginning to understand that even in the most progressive places, old patterns of power and recognition die hard. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the grant application moved through the review process. Green Tech hired a public relations firm to help promote the submission. Local newspapers wrote articles about David's revolutionary water management system. Tech blogs featured interviews with Marcus about the game-changing algorithm his team had developed. My name appeared in none of it, but I had documentation, I had proof, and I was beginning to realize that sometimes the only way to get credit for your work is to be willing to fight for it, even when the odds seem impossible. By April 2022, the weight of being invisible was crushing me. Every day, I watched colleagues present my ideas as their own, saw investors get excited about innovations I had created, and listened to David give interviews about his vision for sustainable urban development. The technology that I had spent countless nights perfecting was being celebrated across the industry, but I might as well have been a ghost. The federal grant review process was moving forward, and the early signs were promising. Green Tech had made it through the initial screening and was now among the final 20 applicants being considered for the $50 million award. Industry publications were calling our proposal revolutionary and game-changing. David had even been invited to speak at the National Sustainable Development Conference in Washington, D.C. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I felt like I was disappearing. The breaking point came during a company-wide meeting in late April. David stood at the front of our converted warehouse office, presenting quarterly results to all 37 employees. Behind him, a large projection screen displayed slides about our grant application status. I'm proud to announce that our Community Resilience Network proposal has advanced to the final round of federal review, David said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to taking credit. The selection committee was particularly impressed with our innovative predictive modeling approach. Scattered applause filled the room. I sat in the back row, my hands clenched in my lap. This breakthrough represents 18 months of intensive research and development, David continued. I want to thank our core technical team, Marcus Rodriguez, our senior technical lead, Sarah Kim, our project manager, and James Wilson, our lead software architect, for their exceptional work bringing this vision to life. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. 18 months ago, I had been the only person at this company even thinking about predictive flood modeling. The core technical team he was thanking had contributed implementation work, project management, and marketing support. Important work, certainly, but not the foundational innovation that made everything else possible. After the meeting, I approached Marcus in the break room. He was pouring coffee from the machine we'd all chipped in to buy, looking pleased with the recognition he'd just received. "Marcus," I said quietly, "we need to talk." He looked around the break room, which was thankfully empty. "What's on your mind, Isabella? You know I developed the core algorithm. You were there when I called you at midnight with the breakthrough. You reviewed my technical documentation. How can you let David credit you as the lead on this work?" Marcus sighed and set down his coffee mug. For a moment, I saw something like guilt flicker across his face. "Isabella, look, I know you did great work on the algorithm development, really innovative stuff. But in a company like this, projects are bigger than individual contributions. David needs to present a certain image to investors and grant committees." "What kind of image?" "Experienced leadership, proven track records. You're incredibly talented, but you're also 24 years old with no management experience. Grant committees want to see senior-level names attached to major projects." I felt my frustration boiling over. "So my work doesn't matter because I'm young?" "That's not what I'm saying. Your work absolutely matters, but David is the CEO. I'm a senior engineer with 15 years of experience. Sarah has managed multiple successful product launches. James has been developing software for a decade. When the grant committee looks at our application, they see a strong, experienced team, built on my innovation. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Built on all of our contributions. That conversation crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about age or experience. It was about a system that valued certain types of contributions over others. Management and implementation were seen as more important than innovation and research. Marketing and presentation were valued over technical breakthrough. The people who could talk about the work were considered more valuable than the people who actually did it. But I wasn't ready to give up. That night, I began documenting everything. I pulled together every email, every research note, every development log that proved my role in creating the algorithm. I organized timestamps showing the progression of my work. I compiled a portfolio that definitively demonstrated my contributions to the project. I also started reaching out to people outside green tech. Dr. Maria Santos, my graduate advisor at MIT, had always told her students that academic integrity was non-negotiable. When I called her to explain what was happening, she was furious. "Isabella, what you're describing is academic theft," she said over the phone. In the university setting, this would be grounds for immediate disciplinary action. But this isn't the university, this is the corporate world. Good ideas deserve credit regardless of the setting. Have you documented your contributions? I've got everything. Emails, research files, development logs. There's no question that I created this algorithm. Then you need to fight for recognition. Not just for yourself, but for every young researcher who comes after you. These patterns don't change unless someone is willing to challenge them. Dr. Santos connected me with Jennifer Liu, a patent attorney in San Francisco who specialized in intellectual property disputes in the tech industry. Jennifer was in her early 40s, sharp and direct, with the kind of confidence that comes from winning battles in male-dominated boardrooms. Our first conversation took place over Zoom on a sunny May afternoon. I was calling from my apartment, while Jennifer was in her downtown San Francisco office, the Golden Gate Bridge visible through the window behind her. "Isabella, I've reviewed the materials you sent," Jennifer said, looking at documents on her desk. "You have exceptionally strong documentation of your contributions. The question is, what do you want to achieve? I want credit for my work. I want my name on the patent applications. I want to be recognized as the person who developed this technology." Jennifer nodded. "Those are reasonable goals, but I need you to understand what you're up against. Green Tech will argue that you developed this algorithm as a work-for-hire employee, which means they own the intellectual property regardless of who created it. They'll also argue that the algorithm was developed using company resources and as part of your assigned job duties. But I can prove that I was working on this algorithm before I was officially assigned to the project. That's good. That's very good, actually. If you can demonstrate that your research began independently, it strengthens your position significantly." Over the next few weeks, Jennifer and I worked together to build a comprehensive case. We identified 3 key arguments. First, that I had begun developing the core concepts for the algorithm during my graduate work at MIT before I was hired by Green Tech. Second, that I had continued this research independently during my first few months at the company before the project was officially launched. And third, that the algorithm I had developed was substantially more innovative and comprehensive than anything my colleagues had contributed. But Jennifer also warned me about the realities of taking on a company like Green Tech. "Isabella, I need you to understand that this could get messy. Corporate intellectual property disputes often involve attempts at character assassination. They may try to portray you as a disgruntled employee, someone who can't work as part of a team, someone who's trying to take credit for collaborative work. But I have documentation. Documentation helps, but public relations battles are different from legal battles. Are you prepared for the possibility that this could damage your reputation in the industry?" I thought about that question for a long time. Was I prepared to be seen as someone who couldn't play well with others? Was I ready to be labeled as difficult, demanding, or egotistical? But then I thought about all the young women and people of color who would come after me. I thought about the message it would send if companies could simply erase the contributions of their most innovative employees without consequence. I thought about the responsibility I had to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. "Yes," I told Jennifer, "I'm prepared." In June 2022, Jennifer sent a formal letter to Green Tech requesting that they acknowledge my contributions to the Community Resilience Network project and include my name as a co-inventor on all related patent applications. The letter was professional but firm, laying out the evidence for my role in developing the core technology. David's response came within a week. It was exactly what Jennifer had predicted: a flat denial, combined with implications that I was being ungrateful and disloyal. Ms. Chen was a valued member of our development team, the letter read, but her claims regarding the scope of her contributions are greatly exaggerated. The Community Resilience Network represents the collaborative effort of multiple engineers, researchers, and managers over an extended period. While Ms. Chen contributed to certain technical aspects of the project, she was not the sole or even primary developer of the technologies in question. The letter went on to suggest that my claims were motivated by disappointment over not being promoted, and that I was attempting to damage the company's reputation in advance of the federal grant announcement. Reading that response felt like being slapped in the face, but it also made me more determined than ever to fight for the truth. In July, news broke that Green Tech had won the federal grant, $50 million for the Community Resilience Network project. The announcement made national news, with David appearing on CNN and NPR to discuss the breakthrough technology that would revolutionize urban water management. I watched those interviews from my apartment, feeling a complex mix of pride and rage. The technology being celebrated was mine, but the person being celebrated was someone who had never written a line of code or solved a single equation related to the project. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to take this public. August 2022 marked the beginning of what would become the most difficult and transformative period of my life. Watching David Park accept congratulations for winning the $50 million federal grant while presenting my innovations as his own vision was the final straw. I had tried to resolve this internally, tried to work within the system, tried to be the team player that everyone wanted me to be. But sometimes, when the system is fundamentally broken, the only option left is to expose it. Jennifer Liu had warned me that going public would be risky, but she also helped me understand that I had legal protections as a whistleblower if I could demonstrate that Green Tech was committing fraud in their federal grant application by misrepresenting the origins of their technology. The False Claims Act provides protection for employees who report fraud against the federal government, Jennifer explained during one of our strategy sessions. If you can prove that Green Tech knowingly submitted false information about the development of this technology, you're protected from retaliation. The key word was knowingly. I had to demonstrate not just that the grant application was inaccurate, but that David and the leadership team knew it was inaccurate when they submitted it. Fortunately, I had the evidence. Email chains where David acknowledged my role in developing the algorithm, but then instructed the team to present it as collaborative work. Meeting notes where Marcus admitted that my breakthrough had changed everything about the project. Internal documentation that clearly showed the timeline of my research and development work. On August 15, 2022, I published a blog post on Medium titled, "The Innovation They Stole: How Green Tech Solutions Built a $50 million Grant on My Uncredited Work." I had spent weeks writing and rewriting it, trying to strike the right balance between being factual and being compelling, between telling my story and providing concrete evidence. The post began, "My name is Isabella Chen. 3 months ago, I watched my former CEO accept a $50 million federal grant for technology that I developed. Today, I'm telling the truth about how innovation really works in corporate America and why so many brilliant ideas get credited to the wrong people." I laid out the entire timeline: my initial research, the breakthrough moment, the months of development work, and the systematic erasure of my contributions. But more importantly, I included documentation: screenshots of emails, excerpts from technical reports, timestamps from development logs. I made it impossible for anyone to dismiss my claims as the complaints of a disgruntled employee. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times across social media. Tech industry publications picked up the story. Local Austin news stations reached out for interviews. My phone was ringing constantly with calls from journalists, lawyers, and supporters. But the response from Green Tech was swift and vicious. Within hours of my post going live, David issued a statement calling my claims defamatory and motivated by professional jealousy. The company's PR firm launched what can only be described as a character assassination campaign, spreading rumors that I was difficult to work with, that I had been on the verge of being fired, that I was attempting to sabotage the company's success. Sarah Kim, who had been positioned as the project manager, gave an interview to TechCrunch where she called my claims wildly exaggerated and suggested that I was taking credit for collaborative work that involved dozens of people. James Wilson posted on LinkedIn about the importance of team players and the danger of individuals who try to claim ownership of group achievements. The most painful response came from Marcus Rodriguez, the supervisor I had trusted and respected. In a statement to the Austin Business Journal, he said, "Isabella Chen was a junior member of our technical team. While she contributed to certain aspects of our algorithm development, her claims about being the primary developer are simply not accurate. This appears to be an attempt to gain attention and undermine the collaborative work of our entire team." Reading those words felt like being betrayed by someone I had considered a mentor, but they also strengthened my resolve. If they were going to lie about my contributions, I was going to make sure the truth came out. The story gained national attention when TechCrunch published a comprehensive investigation into my claims. The reporter, Mike Chen, no relation, had spent weeks reviewing the documentation I had provided and interviewing current and former GreenTech employees. His article, The $50 Million Question, Did GreenTech Steal Its Revolutionary Algorithm?, painted a damning picture of a company that had systematically erased my contributions. The article included quotes from 2 former employees who confirmed that I had been working on the algorithm months before the official project launch, and that my breakthrough had been the foundation for everything that followed. It also revealed that David had told the board of directors that the company's technical innovation team had developed the algorithm without mentioning that the team consisted primarily of one person, me. As the story gained momentum, I started receiving messages from other women and people of color in tech who had experienced similar treatment. Software developers whose code had been credited to their managers, researchers whose publications had been authored by their supervisors, engineers whose innovations had been presented as company breakthroughs without any individual recognition. The message that stuck with me most came from Dr. Keisha Williams, a former Google researcher who had left the tech industry to become a professor at Stanford. "Isabella, what you're doing takes incredible courage. The tech industry has a systemic problem with crediting the actual innovators, especially when those innovators are young women of color. Your willingness to speak out could change how these cases are handled in the future. Don't let them silence you." But GreenTech wasn't giving up without a fight. In September, they filed a defamation lawsuit against me, claiming that my public statements had damaged the company's reputation and threatening to seek millions of dollars in damages. They also filed for a restraining order to prevent me from making further public statements about the company or the project. The lawsuit was clearly intended to intimidate me into backing down. Corporate defamation suits against whistleblowers are notoriously expensive to defend, and most individuals can't afford to fight them. But Jennifer Liu had connected me with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a nonprofit that provides legal support for cases involving free speech and corporate accountability in tech. "Isabella," said Maria Rodriguez, the EFF attorney assigned to my case, no relation to Marcus Rodriguez, "this lawsuit is what we call a SLAP suit, strategic litigation against public participation. It's designed to silence you through the threat of financial ruin, not to actually prove defamation. What does that mean for my case? It means we're going to fight it aggressively, and it also means that if we win, we can potentially recover attorney's fees and damages from GreenTech." As the legal battle intensified, something unexpected happened. The federal government began taking notice. The Department of Environmental Protection, which had awarded the grant to GreenTech, launched an investigation into whether the company had made false representations in their application. The investigation was led by Janet Morrison, a career federal prosecutor who specialized in grant fraud cases. In October, she reached out to Jennifer Liu to request an interview with me. "Ms. Chen," Janet said during our first meeting at the federal building in Austin, "we take grant fraud very seriously. If GreenTech knowingly misrepresented the origins of their technology, that could constitute fraud against the federal government." I spent 4 hours with Janet and her team, walking through every detail of my work on the algorithm. They were particularly interested in the timeline, when I had developed various components, how my work had evolved, and what documentation existed to prove my claims. The good news, Janet told me at the end of the interview, is that you have extraordinary documentation. The bad news is that corporate intellectual property cases are complex, and GreenTech will argue that even if you developed the algorithm, you did so as their employee using their resources. But I started working on this concept during graduate school before I was even hired. That's what makes this case interesting. If you can prove that the foundational ideas predated your employment, it changes the entire legal landscape. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Janet's team to build a comprehensive timeline of my research and development work. We pulled records from MIT showing that I had written papers on predictive flood modeling during my graduate program. We found emails from my final semester where I had discussed the core concepts with professors and classmates. We even located an early prototype I had built for a class project that contained the basic framework for what would become the Community Resilience Network algorithm. The evidence was overwhelming, but I knew that having proof wasn't the same as winning the battle. GreenTech had millions of dollars, a team of expensive lawyers, and a public relations firm working to discredit me. I had the truth, but sometimes that's not enough. In November, just as I was beginning to wonder if I would ever see justice, something happened that changed everything. A federal judge ruled on GreenTech's motion for a restraining order against my public statements. Judge Patricia Hernandez, a Obama appointee with a reputation for fairness and integrity, not only denied the restraining order, but issued a scathing opinion about GreenTech's attempt to silence me. The evidence presented suggests that Ms. Chen has legitimate concerns about the accurate attribution of technical innovations that may have been central to a significant federal grant award, Judge Hernandez wrote. Attempts to silence such concerns through litigation, rather than addressing them through transparent review of the underlying facts, raise serious questions about the plaintiff's motivations and the validity of their claims. The judge's ruling made national news and marked a turning point in the case. Suddenly, it wasn't just about whether I had developed the algorithm. It was about whether companies should be allowed to use the threat of expensive litigation to silence employees who raise concerns about fraud and misrepresentation. But the real vindication was still to come. December 2022 brought the vindication I had been fighting for, but not in the way I had expected. The federal investigation into GreenTech's grant application had been proceeding quietly for months, but on December 8th, everything exploded into the open when the Department of Environmental Protection issued a formal notice suspending GreenTech's $50 million grant pending a full investigation into potential misrepresentations regarding the development and ownership of core technologies. I learned about the suspension the same way everyone else did, from a breaking news alert on my phone. I was sitting in a coffee shop in East Austin, reviewing legal documents with Jennifer Liu, when my phone buzzed with a CNN notification. The headline read, "Federal Government Suspends $50 million GreenTech Grant Amid Fraud Investigation." Jennifer looked up from her laptop when she heard me gasp. "What is it?" I turned my phone toward her, and her eyes widened as she read the headline. "Isabella," she said quietly, "I think we're about to see some very interesting developments." She was right. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The suspension of such a large federal grant was unprecedented, and every major news outlet wanted to understand what had gone wrong. More importantly, the DOE's public statement explicitly referenced my allegations. The suspension follows claims by a former GreenTech employee that the company misrepresented the origins of key technologies in their grant application. The department takes these allegations seriously and has launched a comprehensive investigation into the accuracy of all representations made by GreenTech Solutions in their successful grant proposal. David Park's response was immediate and predictably defensive. In a hastily arranged press conference, he stood behind a podium in GreenTech's conference room, flanked by expensive lawyers, and called the investigation a politically motivated witch hunt based on the false accusations of a disgruntled former employee. GreenTech Solutions stands behind every statement made in our grant application, David declared, his voice shaking slightly with what I recognized as barely controlled anger. The Community Resilience Network represents the collaborative effort of our entire technical team, and we will vigorously defend our reputation against these baseless attacks. But even as David was proclaiming his innocence, Cracks were beginning to show in GreenTech's united front. That same day, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard a familiar voice, one that surprised me. "Isabella? This is Marcus Rodriguez." I felt my stomach clench. Marcus had been one of the most vocal in denying my contributions, and I assumed he was calling to convince me to back down or to deliver some new threat from David. "What do you want, Marcus?" There was a long pause. "I want to apologize, and I want to help." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Isabella, what we did to you was wrong. What I did was wrong. I let David convince me that protecting the company was more important than protecting the truth. But watching this investigation unfold, I can't live with it anymore." Marcus went on to explain that David had been pressuring all the senior employees to present a united front against my allegations, but that several people were beginning to have serious concerns about the legal and ethical implications of their position. "David told us that if we didn't stick together, the company would be destroyed and everyone would lose their jobs," Marcus said. "But lying to federal investigators is a felony. I can't ask my family to risk everything to protect David's reputation." Over the next few days, the solidarity that David had counted on began to crumble. Sarah Kim, the marketing manager who had claimed to be the project coordinator, retained her own attorney and began cooperating with federal investigators. James Wilson, the software developer who had helped implement my algorithm, reached out to my legal team with an offer to provide testimony about the actual development timeline. But the most significant break came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Park, David's own sister and GreenTech's chief technology officer. Lisa had a PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon and had joined the company to help manage its technical operations. Unlike her brother, she had always maintained professional integrity as her highest priority. Lisa requested a meeting with federal investigators on December 15th, and what she told them was devastating to GreenTech's defense. According to sources familiar with her testimony, Lisa confirmed that I had been the primary developer of the algorithm, that David had been aware of my role, and that the company had made a deliberate decision to minimize my contributions in their grant application because they believed that emphasizing my work would make the proposal less competitive. The revelation that David's own sister was contradicting his public statements created a media firestorm. Tech blogs and industry publications began reaching out to other GreenTech employees, and a pattern of testimony emerged that completely undermined the company's position. On December 20th, Judge Patricia Hernandez issued a ruling on GreenTech's defamation lawsuit against me that marked the beginning of the end for their legal strategy. Not only did she dismiss the lawsuit entirely, but she also awarded attorney's fees to me under Texas's anti-SLAPP statute, finding that GreenTech's suit was frivolous and intended primarily to silence legitimate speech about matters of public concern. But the most powerful part of Judge Hernandez's ruling was her factual findings about my role in developing the algorithm. The evidence presented in this case establishes clearly and convincingly that Ms. Isabella Chen was the primary developer of the predictive modeling algorithm that forms the core of GreenTech Solutions' Community Resilience Network. Ms. Chen's contributions were not merely collaborative or supplementary, but rather represented the fundamental innovation that made the entire project possible. The judge continued. The court finds that Ms. Chen began developing the core concepts for this algorithm during her graduate studies at MIT, continued this research independently during her early employment at GreenTech, and achieved the critical breakthrough that enabled the project's success. The subsequent attempts by GreenTech leadership to minimize or erase Ms. Chen's contributions appear to have been motivated by a desire to present what they perceived as more marketable leadership, rather than by any legitimate dispute about the actual origins of the technology. And then came the line that would define everything that followed. Based on the evidence presented, this court concludes that Ms. Chen is not merely a contributor to the Community Resilience Network project. She is the reason this project exists. Those words, "She is the reason this project exists," became the headline in every news story about the case. They were quoted in tech blogs, shared on social media, and repeated in industry conferences. After months of being told that I was exaggerating my contributions, that I was seeking attention, that I was unable to work as part of a team, a federal judge had officially declared that I was the foundational innovator behind a $50 million project. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within 24 hours of Judge Hernandez's ruling, 3 more Green Tech employees had reached out to federal investigators offering to provide testimony. The company's stock price, which had soared after the grant announcement, plummeted by 60%. Several major investors began demanding explanations and threatening to withdraw their support. But for me, the most meaningful response came from the people who reached out to share their own stories. My email inbox was flooded with messages from women and people of color in tech who had experienced similar erasure. Graduate students whose research had been published under their advisors' names. Software developers whose innovations had been credited to their managers. Engineers whose patents had been filed with their supervisors, listed as primary inventors. Dr. Angela Martinez, a former Apple engineer who had left the tech industry after her work on machine learning algorithms, was credited to her male colleagues, wrote, "Isabella, your courage to speak out publicly has inspired hundreds of us who have suffered in silence. You've shown that it's possible to fight back against these systems and win." The validation was overwhelming, but the fight wasn't over yet. Even as Green Tech's legal and public relations strategy collapsed, David Park was making one last desperate attempt to salvage his reputation and his company. On January 3, 2023, Green Tech announced that David was stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on the federal investigation, and that Dr. Lisa Park would be taking over as interim CEO. The announcement tried to frame this as a planned transition, but industry insiders understood it for what it was. David had become too toxic to remain as the public face of the company. Lisa's first act as CEO was to reach out to my legal team with a settlement offer. The proposal was comprehensive. Green Tech would publicly acknowledge my role as the primary developer of the Community Resilience Network algorithm, add my name to all patent applications as the primary inventor, provide a significant financial settlement, and offer me a position as Chief Innovation Officer with equity in the company. "Isabella," Jennifer Liu said as we reviewed the settlement terms, "this is a remarkable offer. Green Tech is essentially admitting everything you've claimed and offering you both recognition and significant compensation." I stared at the documents spread across Jennifer's conference table. After 18 months of fighting, this felt like complete vindication, but something about it didn't feel right. "Jennifer, if I take this settlement, what happens to the federal investigation?" "That would be up to the Department of Environmental Protection. But typically, when companies cooperate and acknowledge wrongdoing, investigations get resolved with fines and reform agreements rather than criminal charges. So David faces no real consequences for lying to federal investigators and trying to steal credit for my work?" Jennifer looked at me carefully. "Isabella, I need to be clear with you about something. This settlement offer is far beyond what most people in your situation could ever hope to achieve. You would be financially secure, professionally vindicated, and positioned to have a major impact on sustainable technology development. Turning this down to pursue criminal charges against David would be a significant gamble. But I had learned something important over the past year. Sometimes, accepting less than you deserve sends the message that the system works, even when it doesn't. Sometimes, the only way to create real change is to demand complete accountability. "I need to think about this," I told Jennifer. That night, I drove out to Mount Bonnell, one of Austin's highest points, and sat looking out over the city lights. The Colorado River wound through downtown like a ribbon of reflected light, and I could see the Green Tech office building in the distance. A year ago, I had been working in that building, believing that innovation and hard work would be enough to succeed. Now I understood how naive that belief had been. But I also understood something else. I had the power to make sure that other young innovators wouldn't have to go through what I had experienced. The settlement offer would restore my reputation and compensate me for what I had lost, but it wouldn't necessarily prevent similar cases in the future. Only a complete exposure of what had happened, including criminal accountability for the people responsible, would send the message that fraudulent behavior in federal grant applications has real consequences. The next morning, I called Jennifer with my decision. "I'm going to turn down the settlement offer. I want to see this through to the end." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Isabella, are you sure? This offer might not be available again." "I'm sure. What David did wasn't just wrong. It was criminal fraud against the federal government. If there are no consequences for that kind of behavior, it will keep happening to other people." On January 10, 2023, the Department of Environmental Protection announced the results of their investigation. The findings were damning. GreenTech had knowingly and materially misrepresented the origins and development of core technologies in their grant application, and several company executives had provided false testimony to federal investigators during the review process. The DOE didn't just revoke GreenTech's grant, they also referred the case to the Department of Justice for potential criminal prosecution. David Park, Marcus Rodriguez, and Sarah Kim were all named as subjects of the criminal investigation. But the most significant part of the announcement was the DOE's official finding about my role in the project. The investigation conclusively established that Ms. Isabella Chen was the primary developer of the predictive modeling algorithm that formed the foundation of GreenTech's Community Resilience Network proposal. Ms. Chen's innovation was the essential breakthrough that enabled the project, and GreenTech's failure to accurately represent her contributions constituted fraud against the federal government. The announcement triggered a cascade of consequences for GreenTech. Major investors pulled their funding. Several employees resigned. The company's reputation in the industry was permanently damaged. Within 6 months, GreenTech Solutions would file for bankruptcy. But the story didn't end with GreenTech's collapse. In March 2023, I received a call from Dr. James Harrison, the director of the Department of Environmental Protection's Innovation Division. Ms. Chen, he said, I'm calling with an unusual proposition. The DOE is launching a new initiative to support innovative technologies that address climate change and environmental challenges. We're looking for someone to lead the technical evaluation process for grant applications, someone with both exceptional technical skills and unquestionable integrity. Would you be interested? The irony wasn't lost on me. The same federal agency that had initially awarded a grant based on my stolen work was now offering me a position overseeing the integrity of their grant process. What would this position involve? I asked. You would be responsible for ensuring that federal grants go to the actual innovators behind breakthrough technologies. You would review applications, interview technical teams, and verify that the people seeking funding are the ones who actually developed the innovations they're proposing to implement. It was the perfect role for someone who had experienced firsthand how the system could be manipulated and corrupted. On June 15, 2023, I accepted the position as Director of Technical Innovation Integrity at the Department of Environmental Protection. My first day on the job was exactly 2 years after I had first called Marcus Rodriguez at midnight with news of my algorithm breakthrough. But the most meaningful moment of vindication came 3 months later, when the Department of Justice announced criminal charges against David Park for fraud against the federal government. At the press conference announcing the indictment, U.S. Attorney Michael Thompson made a statement that captured the significance of the case. This prosecution sends a clear message that federal grant fraud will not be tolerated, regardless of how sophisticated the scheme or how prominent the perpetrators. The defendant in this case attempted to steal credit for innovations developed by a talented young engineer, Ms. Isabella Chen, and then lied to federal investigators to cover up that theft. Ms. Chen's courage in exposing this fraud has not only protected the integrity of federal grant programs, but has also ensured that brilliant innovators like herself receive the recognition they deserve. As I listened to those words, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been an invisible 24-year-old engineer whose innovations were being credited to others. Today, I was a federal official responsible for ensuring that other young innovators wouldn't have to experience what I had gone through. The epilogue to this story came in December 2023, when David Park was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $2.3 million in restitution to the federal government. At his sentencing hearing, Judge Hernandez made a statement that perfectly captured the broader significance of the case. Mr. Park, you had the opportunity to work with a genuinely innovative engineer whose breakthrough could have brought tremendous benefits to communities across America. Instead of recognizing and nurturing that talent, you chose to steal credit for it and lie about it to federal investigators. Your actions represent not just fraud against the government, but a betrayal of the collaborative spirit that drives real innovation. She continued, Ms. Chen's algorithm could have been properly credited from the beginning, and this entire case could have been avoided. Instead, your decision to erase her contributions forced a talented young woman to fight for nearly 2 years just to receive recognition for her own work. The court hopes that this sentence will send a clear message that such behavior will not be tolerated. Today, as I write this story, I'm 26 years old and serving as the Director of Technical Innovation Integrity at the Department of Environmental Protection. The Community Resilience Network, my algorithm, is being implemented in cities across the country under proper federal oversight, with my name correctly listed as the primary developer. I hold 17 patents related to predictive environmental modeling, and my work has been cited in over 200 academic papers. But more importantly, I've used my position to create new standards for verifying the origins of technologies in federal grant applications. Since I started this role, we've prevented at least 12 cases of potential innovation theft, ensuring that grants go to the actual developers of breakthrough technologies. The system that allowed my work to be stolen hasn't been completely fixed. That will take years of sustained effort from many people. But it has been significantly reformed, and young innovators now have better protections and clearer avenues for reporting fraud and misrepresentation. Looking back, I understand that my story isn't just about one person fighting for recognition. It's about the broader challenge of ensuring that innovation is properly credited and that the people who develop breakthrough technologies receive the recognition and support they deserve, regardless of their age, gender, or background. The title of this story, "They Ignored My Name Until the Judge Said She's the Reason This Project Exists," captures the transformation that can happen when someone is willing to fight for the truth, even against overwhelming odds. It took nearly 2 years, a federal investigation and a criminal prosecution, but eventually the truth emerged. And sometimes, that's all we can ask for: the opportunity to tell our stories, to fight for recognition, and to use our experiences to make the system better for the people who come after us. My name is Isabella Chen. I developed the algorithm that prevents floods and purifies water in communities across America. For too long, that innovation was credited to others. But today, the record is clear, and my work continues to make a difference in the world. That's a victory worth fighting for. But this story doesn't end with my personal vindication. It continues every day, in every research lab and startup office where young innovators are developing breakthrough technologies. It continues in corporate boardrooms where decisions are made about who gets credit and who gets forgotten. It continues in federal agencies that distribute billions of dollars in research funding, and in courtrooms where disputes about intellectual property and innovation theft are resolved. The changes that have resulted from this case extend far beyond my individual situation. The Department of Environmental Protection has implemented new verification procedures for all major grant applications, requiring detailed documentation of individual contributions and independent verification of technical claims. Several other federal agencies have adopted similar standards, making it much more difficult for companies to misrepresent the origins of their innovations. Universities have also begun paying more attention to how student research translates into corporate applications. MIT, my alma mater, now requires that graduate students retain copies of all their research work and provides legal resources for students who believe their innovations have been improperly appropriated by employers or collaborators. The tech industry has started having more open conversations about innovation attribution and the systemic biases that prevent certain types of contributors from receiving recognition. Several major companies have implemented innovation integrity programs designed to ensure that breakthrough technologies are properly credited to their actual developers rather than to the managers or executives who present them. Professional organizations have also responded to this case. The American Society of Civil Engineers, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and several other professional associations have developed new ethical guidelines for innovation attribution and intellectual property recognition. These guidelines provide clear standards for how technical contributions should be documented and credited, and they offer support for engineers who believe their work has been improperly appropriated. Perhaps most importantly, this case has inspired other people to speak out about similar experiences. In the 2 years since my story became public, more than 200 individuals have contacted me with their own accounts of innovation theft, collaboration fraud, and systematic erasure of technical contributions. Many of these cases have been successfully resolved through the new reporting mechanisms and legal protections that exist, partly as a result of the precedent established by my case. Dr. Sarah Kim, not the same Sarah Kim who worked at GreenTech, but a mechanical engineer at Stanford who had her robotics research credited to her male colleagues, wrote to me recently, "Isabella, your case gave me the courage to file a formal complaint with my university about attribution fraud in my research lab. The investigation resulted in the correction of 5 published papers and the establishment of new lab policies for crediting student contributions. None of that would have happened without the precedent you established. These individual victories add up to systemic change. Each person who demands proper credit for their work, each organization that implements better verification procedures, each institution that takes innovation attribution seriously contributes to a culture where actual innovators are more likely to receive recognition and support. The financial and professional outcomes of my case have also enabled me to support other people facing similar challenges. I've established a legal defense fund that provides resources for individuals who need to challenge innovation theft but lack the financial means to hire attorneys. The fund has supported 12 cases so far, with 10 resulting in successful resolutions for the actual innovators. I've also used my platform to mentor young women and people of color entering STEM fields, helping them understand how to document their contributions, protect their intellectual property, and navigate corporate environments where their innovations might be undervalued or inappropriately credited. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of this ongoing work is seeing how the Community Resilience Network, the algorithm I developed and fought to claim, is actually being implemented in communities across the country. Cities from Miami to Seattle are using versions of this technology to prevent flooding, manage water resources, and protect vulnerable neighborhoods from climate-related disasters. Last month, I visited Newark, New Jersey, where the CRN system prevented an estimated $50 million in flood damage during a major storm event. I walked through neighborhoods that reminded me of the San Francisco district where I grew up, immigrant families, working-class communities, people who often get overlooked when infrastructure investments are made. But this time, the technology worked. The sensors detected the approaching flood conditions 48 hours in advance. The drainage systems automatically adjusted to handle increased water flow, and the community notification system gave residents time to prepare and protect their property. Standing on a street that would have been underwater without the algorithm I developed, talking to families who had been protected by technology that bore my name and patent attribution, I understood that this fight had been about much more than personal recognition. It had been about ensuring that innovations designed to help people actually reach the people who need them most. The mother of 3 young children who thanked me for developing the system that saved her apartment from flooding didn't care about corporate politics or patent disputes or federal investigations. She cared that when the storms came, her family was safe. But her safety depended on a system that existed because someone had been willing to fight for the truth about who created it. That's the real lesson of this story. Innovation without proper attribution isn't just unfair to the innovators. It can actually harm the communities the innovations are designed to serve. When breakthrough technologies are credited to the wrong people, resources and recognition flow to those who didn't actually create the solutions. That misallocation of resources and attention can slow down future innovation and prevent better solutions from reaching the people who need them most. Today, as Director of Technical Innovation Integrity at the Department of Environmental Protection, I see this dynamic playing out in grant applications and funding decisions every day. My job is to ensure that federal resources go to the people who are actually creating breakthrough technologies, not just to the people who are best at presenting themselves as innovators. It's challenging work, requiring careful investigation of technical claims and detailed verification of individual contributions. But it's also incredibly rewarding, because it means that brilliant researchers and engineers are more likely to receive the support they need to continue developing solutions to pressing environmental challenges. Looking forward, I believe we're at a turning point in how innovation attribution is handled across multiple industries. The legal precedents established by cases like mine, combined with changing cultural attitudes about intellectual property and collaboration, are creating an environment where actual innovators have more protection and support than ever before. But we're not there yet. The system that allowed my work to be stolen and nearly credited to others still exists in many forms across many industries. Young researchers, especially women and people of color, still face systematic barriers to receiving recognition for their contributions. Companies still have incentives to credit innovations to senior executives and experienced managers rather than to the junior employees who may have developed the actual breakthroughs. The fight for innovation integrity is ongoing, and it requires constant vigilance from individuals, institutions, and society as a whole. But I'm optimistic about the direction we're heading because I've seen what can happen when someone is willing to stand up for the truth, even when the odds seem impossible. The title of this story, "They Ignored My Name Until the Judge Said She's the Reason This Project Exists," captures not just my personal journey, but a broader transformation in how we think about innovation, attribution, and justice. It represents the possibility that truth can emerge even from the most complex and difficult circumstances, and that individuals can create meaningful change even when challenging powerful institutions. My name is Isabella Chen. I developed the algorithm that prevents floods and purifies water in communities across America. For too long, that innovation was credited to others. But today, the record is clear. My work continues to make a difference in the world, and other innovators have better protection against the kind of systematic erasure I experienced. That's a victory worth fighting for, not just for me, but for every brilliant mind whose innovations could help build a better world.